Yes, the bike is finally built and ready to ride. Yes, your eyes do not deceive you. The Trifox is finally built and ready to ride. After my unboxing, if you missed that, linked above, and months of delays, sorry about that guys, the bike is finally built, and I'll go through the delays later in the video and some of the pros and cons to building your own bike and buying a frame from China as the Trifox is. Go through the kit I put on the bike, and later in the video we'll go for a ride and see how it performs and see if it's any good or not. Firstly, let's do a quick bike check and go through some of the components I've used on the bike, and it's a mix of old and new. Now, the first component I had to buy, and the biggest cause for a delay in this build, was a RockShox Sid Lux Ultimate Shock. Now, it's a trunnion mount, 165 from eye to eye, with a 45mm stroke, which, according to Trifox, delivers 115mm of rear wheel travel. And then on the front, it's a Fox 32 step cast fork, delivering 100mm of travel, and I've had that fork for about a year now, swapped it from different bikes, a really good bit of kit. So old fork and new rear shock. And then for the group set, brand new Shimano Dior 12-speed group set. Been really keen and excited to test this group set because it's Shimano's most affordable 12-speed group set. SRAM have really been leading the way in the mountain bike market with 12-speed and 1x, and Shimano have been playing catch up, and they've done that at XTR, XT and SLX level, but Dior brings all that technology, 12-speed range to a much more affordable price point. And the only penalty really is on the scales, it's not as light as higher end group sets, but it looks really good and performance should be on a par with those high level group sets in terms of functionality and so on. So a complete Dior group set, 1051 cassette on the back, single ring on the front, and a set of matching 4-pot brakes. This new 12-speed group set uses Shimano's brand new micro spline cassette, so I need to buy a new 3-hub body to go on the wheels. And the wheels, talking of which, are a set of old Hope Tech Enduro alloy Pro 4 hub wheels that I've had for quite a few years. Not the lightest set of wheels, but it's the only set of wheels I had available at the time, so I found those in the back of the garage and I put those on for now. That's definitely an area where I can save a bit of weight. And for tyres, I've gone for a set of Schwalbe Racing Ralph and Racing Ray. Racing Ralph on the back and Racing Ray on the front. Really lightweight, easy tubeless, and a fast rolling set of tyres. Should be good for this autumn intermediate conditions where it's a bit dry, but we're getting a lot of rain, so the mud is starting to increase. So lightweight tyres, not the lightest wheels, but I might put some different wheels on down the line, and they're tubeless as well. For the rest of the finishing parts, I had a good rummage around in the back of the garage and found some old parts, but nice parts, admittedly. A carbon fibre seat post, a fabric saddle, which is my personal favourite, short stem, and DMR grips, which I really like. So the handlebar and stem are probably wider and shorter than you would expect on a cross-country race bike. But even though it is a cross-country bike, I've not built it up to be as fast as possible. I've gone for control because I like to enjoy the bike on the descents and through single track. So I've gone for a shorter stem and a wider handlebar. But that is down to personal preference. If you want it more racy, go for longer stem, narrow handlebar, bar ends perhaps if you want. So that's down to personal preference. Let's talk about price and weight, and we'll start with weight first, and I'll check my notes because lots of numbers to remember here. So the frame without a shock for a size large on my scales is 2,286 grams. The shock adds 231 grams for a complete frame and shock weight of 2,517 grams. For comparison, a Specialized Epic frame in a size medium with a shock is 1,869 grams. And a top-end Scott Spark frame, also a size medium with a shock, is 1,849 grams. Those are the weights I could find, claimed medium weights. So the frame and shock is quite a bit heavier than the top-end Scott or Specialized offerings. But remember, this frame is $1,000, so a lot cheaper than the $2,000 or $3,000 those alternatives would cost you. The complete bike weight, as you see it here, for a size large, is just over 25.5 pounds. Which is really not very light, to be honest. It could be lighter. I think the weight in the wheels is probably one area where I can save weight. The Shimano Dior group set is clearly not the lightest option, and the handlebar stem could save weight. So there's areas here I could save weight, but it's not too shabby really. But let me know what you think of weight down below. And let's talk about price as well, and I'll again consult my notes. A little bit tricky here with prices because different currencies, and also the retail price and the discounted price does vary a lot from region to region. So I've used retail prices where I can, but most of the components here can be bought at discount. So a rough guide rather than a very detailed cost breakdown. We'll start with a frame, and that is currently discounted to $1,000 or 850 euros. I'll use euros for the rest of the price breakdown just because it's easier. The shock at 290 euros. The fork is about 1,000 euros. The Shimano Dior 12-speed group set, that's about 360 euros. The wheels, about 400 euros. The tyres for the pair, about 120 euros. The handlebar and stem, about 150 euros. The carbon seat post, about 100 euros. The saddle, another 40 euros. And the hardware, bolts and mounting kit, about 30 euros. So roughly speaking, about 3,400 euros for the complete bike as you see it here. Now that's quite a lot of money. You can buy some quite good bikes off the shelf. For a comparison, a Scott Spark RC 900 Comp with SRAM NX Eagle 12-speed and a Fox 32 ribbon fork will cost you 3,300 euros. But the spec on this bike is higher with a better quality fork, a rear shock and other components. But why did it take me so long, so many months to build this bike and finally share it with you? Well, partly I've been quite busy, but partly some of the issues with buying a frame direct from China is you don't get all the bits and bobs you need to build a bike. Now, building a bike is a really enjoyable process. You have complete control over the complete build and specification, so you can build it to your price or your dreams and aspirations for your bike. But some of the issues with buying a frame is that it was a frame only. So there's no shock, didn't have the right mounting hardware, there's no through axle, no seat clamp and no headset. Now normally if you buy a frame set from a big brand like Specialized or Scott, you get a shock, you get a through axle, you get a seat clamp and you often get a headset. So most of the component parts you need, the small parts you need to then get the bike built. But this frame came with none of that. There's no headset, no seat clamp, no through axle and no shock. And worse yet, there was no mounting hardware. Well, it came with mounting hardware for a normal shock, but as you can see, the frame is clearly designed for a trunnion shock. And that caused quite a delay getting the right bolts at the top and bottom to fit the shock. So I reached out to Trifox and they were very helpful on email, but they couldn't help out in terms of sending out the right kit. So through some trial and error, I've got a bag of bits at home now. I managed to find some bolts from chain reaction, which I think were destined for a Vitus bike, and a RockShox mounting hardware on the top to then fit this shock. And that caused quite a delay because you had to figure out what bolts I needed, what diameter, pitch, thread and size for the top and bottom I needed to get the shock to fit. So that was a big delay. And buying the shock itself was quite a delay, both in terms of finding the right size and one that didn't cost an absolute fortune. Now normally when you buy a frame, the manufacturer will do a deal with RockShox or Fox for a reduced price on the shocks, so you're not paying full retail for the shock. But when you're buying a shock from a retailer, you're looking at full retail price, and some of the shocks are really expensive. The RockShox came out at the best price for me at just under 300 euros. The right length, 165 eye to eye with 45mm stroke, giving a claimed 115mm of rear wheel travel. Got a compression dial on the front for locking it out and easy rebound adjustment, so everything I wanted in a shock without breaking the bank. But building a bike was actually pretty painless. Press fit bottom bracket, no problems there. And the cables and hoses were easy to thread through the frame with these guides which you can remove, so lots of access and a big access port at the bottom. So yeah, the build was actually pretty straightforward once I had all the parts in my possession, which took quite a while, especially the mounting hardware for a shock. An absolute nightmare really. I can't really stress how bad that was. And that is something to consider if buying a frame from China. The prices can seem really appealing, really attractive, but if you don't have a shock, you don't have all the mounting hardware, extra cost and extra time to get all the parts. Now the shock itself is quite a big chunk of cost, so $1,000 for the frame and then $400 for a shock or thereabouts. So that definitely pushes the price up. And getting the bolts, getting all the hardware, that can add to the cost as well, and also add to the stress of building a bike compared to buying a frame set with a shock included. So not plain sailing as I hoped it would be way back when the frame first arrived. But was the wait worth it? Was the wait worth all this time and stress and extra cost putting it together? Well, I'm gonna get changed, hit the trail, go for a ride and see how it performs. And I've actually been riding it for the last couple of weeks on my local trails and done quite a few good rides on the bike, enough to get to know it, enough to share my observations and thoughts about this bike with you in this video. And firstly, get negative out of the way first. All the bolts holding the shock and the rocker linkage into the frame came loose on the very first ride. So that was a bit of an issue to deal with, which required removing the crankset to get to the main pivot. So if you're buying a frame, or any frame in fact, make sure all the hardware bolts are done up nice and tight, and use thread lock if you have to. But since then they've been fine, so no issue. And that really has been the only negative to report so far. It's mostly positives, including, as you can see, the frame has not snapped, it's not failed, it hasn't exploded, despite some fear mongering in the comment section on my first look of this bike. So that's a good thing. I did have some concerns when people shared their horror stories with similar frames, not Trifox, but other Chinese frames. And that's a big question mark around buying a frame direct from China, is the issue of quality. Do you have the reassurance you have with a big, well-known brand? And so far, touch wood, it's been fine. And I've been treating it pretty hard, you know, dropping it off drops and jumps, hitting some roots and rocks pretty hard, and yeah, no squeaks, creaks, groans, nothing to suggest it might fail imminently. So that is a big tick in the box so far. But I keep riding it longer term to see how it does over the winter months coming up. Let's talk about performance, and we'll start with suspension. And something I didn't address in the first part of the video is the tune of the shock. Now, shocks come in various tunes, light, medium, high, in terms of compression. And when a frame designer is designing their suspension, they work with RockShox or Fox to develop a tune to suit the kinematics of the rear suspension to get the desired traits, where it's very progressive or very linear or whatever they're looking for, anti-squat, anti-rise, all those other key factors that determine how a full suspension bike rides. But Trifox gave no indication of what tune this frame was designed for, so I took a punt on an ML tune, so middle of the road tune, and so far it's been pretty good. It's very progressive, whether that's the rear suspension layout or the rear shock. The suspension is very progressive. It doesn't bob around too much, which means it's very efficient. So when pedaling uphill, for instance, it's not moving around excessively, and I don't have to use a lockout lever at all. I haven't touched it at all. It's firm enough, there's enough anti-squat in the suspension that with 25% sag, which I've got set up for my body weight, it's not bobbing around too much. So really nice, efficient, firm suspension. But what it's not is buttery smooth. It doesn't give you that magic carpet feel like you can steamroller through a rooty, rocky section. It does give you a lot of feedback. It's very much a cross-country bike in the traditional sense, in terms of suspension geared for pedaling performance, rather than like let you smash down through rocks like a bigger travel enduro bike. Now, you could of course get the shock tune to suit your riding style, so a lighter tune, lighter compression, get it revalved, reshimmed and so on, and have a softer setting in the open, and then you use the lockout lever for climbing. So that is an option. So that's a rear suspension, and the front suspension works really well. I know and love this fork, and I've got it set up really nicely, and it matches the rear suspension. So the balance of the bike, front to rear, is really good. So no problems there at all. Now onto geometry, and that's one of the things I really like about the Trifox frame. It's quite a long reach, 475 on this size large, quite a long wheelbase, head angle a little bit slacker than something like that Canyon Lux I rode last year. And that really shows in the capability of this bike in descents and through corners. It's a really capable bike, much more capable and much more fun than that Canyon Lux I had last year. So yeah, really good bike for descending. If you like your technical trails, this sort of geometry, what we might call progressive, works really well, despite only having 100mm travel front and rear, well 115 at the back, but 100mm at the front. So I'm liking the geometry. A benefit of the long reach on this bike is that I can run a short stem and still have a nice stretch from the saddle to the handlebars and not feel too squashed up, too cramped on climbs. And the seated position when climbing, especially longer climbs, is really nice, a really comfy bike. The seat angle is steep enough to put me in a really good, efficient, powerful pedaling position with good weight and a forward position over the bottom bracket and the cranks, so I can get power through the drivetrain really nicely to the rear wheel. And the reach to the handlebars is nice. I personally like the short stem and the wide handlebar. It's working really well with me, and it combines really nicely with the geometry on this frame. Of course, you go to a longer stem, narrow handlebar if you prefer, personal preference. Every build is different, but that's working for me really well. The general performance of the bike is good. Plenty of stiffness from the frame with a big down tube, big oversized bottom bracket area, no flex or twist from the rear triangle or the main pivot hardware. So really direct, really efficient pedaling bike that really transfers power well to the back wheel. It climbs really well, whether like really steep, out of saddle, grunty climbs or long mellow climbs. A really good climbing bike. A good long distance bike as well for marathons, 100 kilometers, that sort of riding. The only downside really is the weight is higher than I would like. It's 25.5 pounds for a size large without pedals. Now I think lighter wheels would definitely help, save some weight, but the overall weight isn't much lighter than that YT ISO 130 trail bike I'm also testing. And if you missed that, linked above if you want to go and check out my first look on that bike. So the weight is something that could be improved. The weight doesn't really hold it back on the climbs. It still climbs very well and it's a good all-day marathon bike. It still handles well, it's very responsive, very direct handling, but the weight could be £2 maybe lighter. And I think there's a lot of weight in the frame, as I showed earlier, like 600-700 grams heavier than some rivals from Scott and Specialized. So if you want the lightest cross-country build, this Trifox is not offering that. But remove weight from the equation and it's a really good handling bike. And so far, no problems. As you can see, it's all one piece, hasn't broken yet. No creaks, groans from the bottom brackets. It's all going really well and I'm enjoying it. It's a lot of fun. Now, I was a little bit cynical, a little bit skeptical when it arrived and I wasn't sure what to expect really, but it's really impressed me. I have to say, I am humbled by the performance of the bike. It's done a really good job. Now, to sum up this video, my experience of getting a Chinese frame and building it and riding it is it hasn't been as bad as many people might have feared it would be in terms of my experience with the company, the frame build and the quality. I addressed some issues in terms of weight and you can see in that other video where they go inside the frame. But now riding, it's a good bike. But would I buy it over a mainstream brand? Well, that's a tricky question. You get a 2-year warranty with it. How good that is, I don't know, but how good is any warranty these days? Big question mark. There are issues with building it, as I addressed earlier, in terms of all the bolting hardware. So not the good support you want from a frame and you would get from a Specialized or a Scott, perhaps. And you can't buy a complete bike as well. So if you want to buy a complete bike, those other brands still offer that opportunity to go into a shop and buy a bike direct. But if you are looking to save a bit of money and you do have parts to build up a frame, then I wouldn't be put off. It's not a bad option at all. Now, I'm not recommending it at all. I'm not recommending you go out and buy a Chinese frame, but it has to be an interesting experience and something I've wanted to do for a long time because many people have told me about the benefits of getting a cheap Chinese carbon frame. And so far, apart from building it up and the issues with building up I mentioned earlier, it's not been that bad. But I'll keep riding the bike, keep thrashing it on my local trails over the coming months as winter approaches and see how it goes. And if I have any updates, I'll definitely deliver you another video to give my thoughts on the bike if anything changes. But so far, so good. A quick word on the components. I won't go into too much detail. Most of the kits I know, like the wheels, the tyres, the Fox suspension foil, handlebar, stem. The biggest thing to talk about is the Shimano Dior 12-speed group set, which I have to say I've been really, really impressed with. The performance, the quality of shifting and the brakes is exceptional and easily as good as Shimano's more expensive offerings like SLX and XTR above it. Blindfolded, you probably would be hard pushed to tell the difference. Now you got wide range cassette, plenty of ability to get up the steepest climbs, but still really fast on descents when you go down as well. Got the rear mechanism with the clutch device inside, giving good chain retention. One by designed chain ring. Nice stiff alloy cranks as well. The 4-pot brakes are really powerful, nice lever feel, and so far I've not had that wandering bite point you get with some Shimano brakes, so that's good. And I love the rapid fire shifter, which you can push and pull to change up to harder gear. The only thing I don't like is a really picky thing. It's the look of the way the chain ring is connected to the spider, but I'm being really fussy. But I will do a more in-depth review on the group set in a future video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. So let me know what you think of this bike and this build and this approach to building a bike in the comment section down below. Have you also bought a Chinese frame direct from a Chinese manufacturer? or would you rather stick with a mainstream, well-known brand? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the bike. Been a really interesting experience, this one, so yeah, I'd love to get your feedback. But that's all for now. Make sure you hit that like button if you enjoy watching this video. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Follow me on Instagram, and I'll see you all again next time. Thank you for watching.